Indonesia has just turned down access to between $20 and $30 billion in potential emergency financing from two of the world's most influential financial institutions, and that decision signals more than short-term confidence. It raises a larger question about how emerging economies position themselves in a period of global volatility driven by conflict, energy price shocks, and tightening financial conditions. What this video unpacks is not simply a rejection of external funding, but a calibrated statement about fiscal strength, policy credibility, and strategic autonomy, with implications that extend beyond Southeast Asia. If this stance holds under pressure, it reinforces Indonesia's image as a resilient, self-sufficient economy capable of absorbing external shocks without multilateral assistance. If it fails, it could expose vulnerabilities that were underestimated in current projections. And if it evolves into a broader trend among emerging markets, it may gradually shift how institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank operate in crisis response. The outcome matters because these institutions are designed to act as lenders of last resort, and declining their support changes the mechanics of global financial stabilization. To understand the significance, the context begins with Indonesia's economic trajectory over the past 2 decades. Following the Asian financial crisis in 1997 to 1998, Indonesia underwent deep structural reforms, including fiscal consolidation, banking sector restructuring, and improved regulatory oversight. Those reforms gradually rebuilt credibility with global markets. By the 2010s, Indonesia had established itself as one of the more stable large emerging economies, with GDP growth consistently around 5% and a debt-to-GDP ratio kept relatively moderate compared to peers. This institutional memory shapes current policy decisions. The government has prioritized maintaining fiscal buffers and limiting exposure to external debt vulnerabilities. As of recent data, Indonesia's foreign exchange reserves and fiscal space provide a cushion against capital outflows and currency volatility. These buffers are central to the decision made by Finance Minister Purbaya Yudhi Sadewa, who assessed that the country does not currently require external financial assistance despite offers made during the spring meetings in Washington. The key actors in this situation include Indonesia's finance ministry, the IMF leadership under Kristalina Georgieva, and the World Bank's lending framework designed for crisis support. The IMF and World Bank had collectively prepared between $20 billion and $30 billion in available financing aimed at countries facing instability linked to ongoing global tensions, particularly disruptions associated with the Middle East. These funds are typically structured to provide liquidity support, stabilize balance of payments, and reinforce investor confidence during periods of stress. Purbaya's position was grounded in measurable indicators. Indonesia maintains fiscal reserves of approximately $25 billion, and its current state budget is assessed internally as sufficient to absorb near-term shocks. He indicated that while the offers were acknowledged and appreciated, the government does not see an immediate need to draw on them. This is consistent with Indonesia's broader fiscal strategy, which since late 2024 has shifted toward more adaptive policy measures aimed at managing volatility, including rising global energy prices. Recent developments reinforce this stance. The IMF has characterized Indonesia as a relative bright spot in the global economy, citing stable macroeconomic management, consistent policy direction, and credible fiscal governance. Growth projections presented by the Indonesian government estimate expansion between 5.4% and 6% in 2026, even as global markets experience fluctuations. These projections are not speculative. They are tied to domestic consumption strength, commodity exports, and controlled inflation dynamics. At the same time, the global environment remains uncertain. Energy prices have shown upward pressure due to geopolitical tensions, and capital flows into emerging markets are sensitive to interest rate policies in advanced economies. In this environment, access to multilateral financing is typically viewed as a safety net. Indonesia's decision to decline that safety net reflects a calculated assessment that its internal buffers are sufficient for current conditions. One possible scenario is that Indonesia's confidence is validated. In this case, growth remains within the projected range. Fiscal reserves are preserved or expanded, and external shocks are managed without significant disruption. This outcome would strengthen Indonesia's position in global financial discussions and potentially encourage other emerging economies to rely more heavily on internal mechanisms rather than external assistance. Over time, this could reduce the frequency with which IMF programs are activated, particularly for countries with similar structural profiles. A second scenario introduces more strain. If global conditions deteriorate further, for example through sustained increases in energy prices or sharper financial tightening, Indonesia may face pressures on its currency, trade balance, or fiscal accounts. In such a case, declining early access to multilateral funding could limit flexibility. The government might then need to adjust policy more aggressively, either through spending reductions, borrowing at higher market rates, or revisiting external support options under less favorable conditions. The geopolitical implications extend beyond Indonesia itself. Southeast Asia is a region where economic stability is closely linked to global supply chains, commodity flows, and investment patterns. Indonesia, as the largest economy in the region, plays a central role in maintaining that stability. Its ability to navigate external shocks independently contributes to regional confidence. At the same time, decisions like this influence how international institutions allocate resources and engage with emerging markets. There is also a broader systemic dimension. When a country declines multilateral assistance, it signals that the traditional hierarchy between global financial institutions and borrowing countries is evolving. This does not diminish the role of the IMF or World Bank, but it does suggest that their engagement models may need to adapt to a landscape where some economies have greater internal resilience and prefer to maintain policy autonomy. In practical terms, the mechanisms at play are straightforward but significant. Fiscal reserves provide immediate liquidity, allowing governments to stabilize spending without external borrowing. Policy credibility reduces borrowing costs in international markets, making alternative financing more accessible if needed. And consistent macroeconomic management builds investor confidence, which can mitigate capital flight during periods of uncertainty. Indonesia's current position reflects a combination of these factors rather than a single decision point. What follows next will depend on how global conditions evolve and how Indonesia's internal indicators respond. Key metrics to watch include reserve levels, inflation trends, exchange rate stability, and growth performance relative to projections. These will determine whether the current assessment of fiscal strength holds over time.